Tonight, on Life on the Rock, we have Sister Lucia Treanor, Part 2. We'll hear a reflection from Father Donald Haggerty and much more.
Tonight on Life on the Rock, we have Sister Lucia Treanor, Franciscan sister of the Eucharist, who's written a great story of a remarkable soul, Elwood, a World War II hero who laid down his life for others. It's a story that you will not want to miss. This is a part two of a part two ongoing conversation. So we're now going to a reflection with Father Haggerty.
Sometimes I'm asked the question, how can I deepen my life of prayer? That could be asked by a religious sister, even a priest, people who have gone through formation and training in prayer, and many times lay people have a desire for a deeper life of prayer. And my first recommendation would be, even for a new convert or somebody many years in the practice of the faith, go to the Gospels, to read the words of Jesus Christ in a private way every day, not just to hear the Gospel at Mass, but to take his words and realize more and more deeply, we're listening to God speak to us in the voice of Jesus. And especially when he asks questions in the Gospel, that's a good place to start and experience how personal our Lord can be when we are praying in private. The first words that Jesus spoke to any of the apostles were in the first chapter of John, when he spoke to Andrew and John the apostle, we can presume, and he asked the question of them, what are you looking for? It's a great question. It was not a casual question. It pierced their souls. And it's a question that trails all of us for a lifetime. What are you looking for? If we could answer, like St. Thomas Aquinas answered, I am looking, I want only you. We can keep coming back to that great desire for God himself and keep going back in hunger to the words of Jesus in the Gospel. We're going to find he becomes very personal. As we open up the Gospel, he's there to speak in a personal way in that hour to us.
Well, Sister Lucia, welcome back to Life on the Rock.
Thank you.
And you've written a book on a remarkable story of a man by the name of Elwood, a World War II hero, and also a relative of yours. And this is actually a part two discussion that we're continuing on with. But why is it important to tell this story in today's world?
Well, this was a man of virtue, but he was just an ordinary man. Mm-hmm. And you can see that in his childhood. It's important to realize that the markers, the things that happen to us in our life, just the ordinary circumstances of life form us, and they form heroic virtue too. And so I was curious and wanted to really think about what the things were in Elwood's life that led him to be such a good man that he would give his life for 6 other men.
All right. And what was his kind of general reputation on the ship?
They admired him, but they liked him. He was not stiff.
Yeah.
He was fun, and but generous of service and so forth. And I tried to show some of those instances in the book so that you could see all the sides of him. But he was reverent for sure. Mm-hmm. And I want to read, if it's okay, a prayer that he said every day. And we know this because the chaplain of the ship told us that he said it every day. It's called a soldier's prayer, and Father Mahoney, the chaplain, gave it to all the men to pray, and he knew that Elwood did. Mm-hmm. O God of love, make me a soldier worthy of the great cause for which we fight. Give me strength when the going is hard. Give me courage when danger is near. In thee I place my trust. Lead me through the perils of this war to the better world to which I have dedicated my life. But if in the service of thee and my country it calls for the sacrifice of my life, I only ask, dear God, that thou be with me at that moment, confident that thy peace awaits me in eternity. Amen.
Yeah.
And he didn't know when he prayed that moment was going to come very soon.
Right. And how that prayer really illustrates his last moments.
It does.
I mean, those are two mirrors just kind of looking at each other.
That's right.
As you know, you're reading it to me, and just to see that response, but if it be the case that I have to lay down my life, that you'll be with me. And that, again, he's going out there to save 6 men who cannot take care of themselves, who are totally dependent on others. And it takes a lot of just guts, as Mother Angelica would say, to go into those holes, and to go into those hallways in the ship, and to carry those men out. And at that moment, when you know this is it, how many of us could rise to that occasion?
And keep doing it,
And
too.
keep doing
After
it.
he carried the couple of them down, and the halls were now slippery, and he was now walking on the walls of the ship because it had turned, and to keep doing it till he got the very last
And I
man out.
imagine it was dark.
I'm sure it was, yeah.
I imagine things,
Water
the
was
lights
everywhere,
go out,
and yeah.
and you're probably, feeling your way around just to get out, And to know, too, and I always kind of think, as I was thinking about this, you've rescued these men, but then you're tied, basically to your tomb.
Yes.
And in those last moments, the fact that he prayed that prayer, I have to believe he was ready.
I think so.
Yeah. He had that real act of faith, and I think that's something that really did shine at the end of his life, but it was always there. He had that reputation of being religious.
That's right. That's true. And what's interesting, too, is how people all over the world do recognize this virtue in others. The President Coolidge, the ship, is known all over the world as one of the great dive sites. And these are divers from all kinds of places, all different religions, and yet they have honored Elwood by naming the door that these men came out as Elwood's door.
Oh, wow.
And they named it, but that's the way it's known. So it shows you that the goodness that shines in people is recognized by others.
And it's interesting that the door would be named after him, that he didn't go through himself.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but even the ship, the history of the ship is actually fascinating, because when it went down, that was a devastating loss.
A huge loss for the
Tell us
United
about
States.
the ship.
The ship was an incredible ship. She was the largest and fastest, now think of that, both biggest and fastest, of the luxury liners that crossed the Pacific.
Wow.
And she had a glitz about her because she had carried Douglas MacArthur, she had carried Mary Pickford and other celebrities across to Asia. And then in 1941, President Roosevelt converted her to a troop ship. Now, she had been outfitted with all kinds of luxury. She had 2 swimming pools. Oh. She had a gorgeous dining room, even with a deck so that the musicians could, a separate little level for musicians, all kinds of sitting rooms and card rooms, and even a little room, and hairdresser salons. Wow. And even a little room where people could check their ticket tape, because the people who took this ship usually had stocks. And all of a sudden they were gone, and instead she was painted gray, and all of the bunks for the 5,000 men were installed, and many toilets. Wow. And so forth, and so she looked quite different. But she still was a grand ship, and she not only had the 5,000 men, but in her hold she had jeeps and munitions, and very importantly, she had all the quinine a supply that the United States had going to Guadalcanal because men were dying of malaria.
Right.
And they lost all of that. So that meant men died because that ship went down just from the malaria, you know.
And that battle went on for, I think, about 6 months or so on the island. And really at that time, that was a major battle going on. And to lose all of that medical supply, you know, that's a tremendous, I didn't realize it was all of it.
It was the whole supply
Wow.
that the United States put together for the men.
Yeah, that is yeah, and again, you lose a lot of the ammo, the jeeps, and the resources. But also another character you were mentioning him was the chaplain. I thought he kind of has a remarkable, what was he like? And how did he maybe influence Elwood?
He was a hero too, although never decorated.
Oh, really?
But yes, he was, he went down in the ship also, that's why he was a hero. He was the chaplain of the 172nd Infantry Division that was on this ship with Elwood's unit. And and he had gone down himself because in the morning he had been with the men in the brig. He knew their men, and he had been working with a mental patient. And he didn't know whether they could get out either. The same thought that Elwood had about the infirmary. And so he saw Elwood down there. And he wanted to write this letter, but he wasn't allowed to write it because of the censorship that was in place because of the war. So it had to wait for about a year.
Well, sister, we got to go to a break. But whenever we come back, we want to get into the letter written by the chaplain. Well, sister, tell us or share with us what the chaplain had to say about Elwood.
Well, he wrote to Elwood's parents a wonderful letter. I'll just read a little bit of it, but it tells us a lot about what was really happening down there as the ship was sinking. As chaplain of the 172nd Infantry, I was on the ship with your son when he gave his all that others might live. Quote, greater love than this hath no man, that he lay down his life for his friends. This war has produced and will produce many men of heroic courage, but it is my opinion, and I am sure that of every man on this ship, that there will be no greater hero than Captain Ewart. When we were ordered to abandon the ship, your son was on deck and could have easily and with honor slid down the ropes to safety. But with that courage and love which is more than human, he went below to make certain that his boys were safely getting off the ship. I saw him there myself as I went down to the brig to make sure that the boys there had been freed, and especially to check on a mental patient whom I had visited a half hour before. The ship had listed to one side, and Captain Ewart had tied a rope around himself and fastened it to a railing so that he could rescue many boys who were unable to climb up the slippery, water-filled ship. And he did rescue them, all. Then, just as he had expended nearly all of his strength in saving others, and 2 of his fellow officers were about to pull him to safety, the ship went down with all 3. Somehow the others were shot up to the surface, but Captain Ewart's body is still tied to his post. He died doing more than his duty, and his heroic sacrifice has instilled in us all a spirit which will help every man in our combat team to carry on for Captain Ewart and for our beloved country. His body is still with the ship, but his immortal soul is with God. I am sure that you need not worry about his spiritual safety.
Wow. That's,
very consoling for his parents.
Right. And I think something that struck to me when you were reading that is whenever they said, or he said, he could have easily and with honor get off the ship. But again, he recognizes almost a greater cause than himself in that moment, that there's lives down there.
Lives.
And I think, too, his witness to the dignity of human life.
That's right.
That he really did put others before himself. you know, of that really, I think, terrible moment when you realize this is probably it, you know, and there isn't, you know, much I can do at this point. Now, I've done what I can do to get them to safety, but, you know, it does take a great act of faith and a great confidence in God, you know, to resign yourself that way, you know, and I think, you know, and Jesus promises, you know, in the gospel, you know, there is no greater love than for a man to lay down his life for another. That's probably the greatest act of love that we can express on this side of life. And to me, that the stories like that have to be told, you know, to religious, to priest, because it does build up that moral character, but also his virtue, his moral virtue of fortitude. How does that affect you?
Well, it certainly sets a mark for all of us to say, am I doing my best?
Right, yeah.
Yes, and I'm aware, I teach literature, and I am very aware in literary terms that since the early 20th century, that's when the anti-hero was introduced into literature, became very popular. We need real heroes. We need them desperately, and they're there, but we need the stories to be told.
Right, and I think you just kind of brought up something too. It's like in the world today, you see a lot of like superhero people with faults and all that, and you can look to sci-fi for that. I'm usually not one of them, because there's men like these that did live ordinary lives, that were guys you saw in the mess hall, that were probably, you know, sweeping the deck, that were there, you know, that went through training camp with you.
Yes.
You know, and it's not just some war out in outer space or anything, but here's, you know, a man of great faith, of great integrity, but a great, I think, just moral character. And that's a real thing we can achieve in this side of life, is actually developing that Christian character that we need.
And reflecting on where you are and what you're doing. Part of the story, too, as they travel across from San Francisco over to the South Pacific, I tried to show how the men at first didn't know where they were going, but once they did know where they were going, then they began to think seriously about the fact they could die.
Right.
And what they must be dealing with, each in his own way.
Well, I think there's too a stress of what, again, you're going into such a hostile environment that you don't really know what you're getting into, and you know, they just arrived and already their ship is going down because, you know, they're protecting themselves from maybe an enemy sub or something. But it just goes to show the reality of what that was like. You know, there is no free pass. It's not, you know, you just go over there and you're a hero. But there was a human formation there that allowed him to go beyond the call of duty and to, I just think, make that ultimate sacrifice, which really, I think, too, is so powerful in relation to religion and then our country. I think whenever you combine those two virtues, there is something special.
Yeah, we do need the stories of virtue, and we have them around us all the time. We just have the two young children at Fatima, right, to show us what heroic virtue it looks like in children.
Oh,
even.
yeah.
So.
And Sister, tell us real quickly about your community.
My community is the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist. Our mother house and our general aid are in Meriden, Connecticut. And we have houses throughout the United States in 9 places, and then also in Canada, Vancouver, British Columbia, and the Holy Land, and in Rome and Assisi. And our charism is to bring a sense of the sacred to the secular world. And we do it in many different ways. That's one of the original thoughts of our foundress, Mother Rose May Pender. was that each young woman brings the gifts God has given her and her interests and her formation with her family. And that contributes in a certain way to all of society. And so discovering that and then working toward the best that she can do in that area that she is good at or is interested in is a wonderful gift for the church. And so we do different things. And so we are really presenting new apostolates in religious life. One of our sisters for many years was an airline pilot, and she flew medicine over the border into the regions of Canada that needed medicines. She then, when she became a little older, is now a mortician and buries our sisters.
Wow.
So both of those are very unusual
Yeah.
professions to follow. We have pharmacists, we have an attorney, we all do different things. I'm a college
Okay,
professor.
well, great. Well, Sister Lucia, thank you for taking the time to write the book and share this great story with us. And thank you for being on Life on the Rock, and God bless you.
Thank you very much.
One of the things that really struck me about this conversation I had with Sister Lucia and the life of Elwood is that something we can reflect on is, how will we be remembered? Will we be remembered for our faith, for our hope, for our unselfishness as he was? Or can we be known as somebody just filled with vice, selfishness, someone who's just indulged in sin? And those are choices we have to make. But I think Elwood is a great reminder for us that we too have a higher calling to grow in that Christian faith and that witness, to be Christ-like to others, to lay down our lives for those who are in most need, especially for those who cannot defend themselves. So again, how will we be remembered? These are great words to meditate upon and to think about. Well, thank you for joining us on Life on the Rock. God bless you.
From my shame Remember